Hello, welcome to Gardener's World on this Easter weekend. This used to be the cottage garden, and we took out almost all the herbaceous perennials. Now I'm gradually putting them back. This is an Apita, a catmint. This is an Apita called, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, as in P-U-R-R, Jeune Bleu. Persian blue, it's catmint, and Apita, get it? Never mind, it doesn't matter about the name because it's a lovely plant. And it's nice and low, so not too tall. And one of the things about catmint is it can flop a bit. So if it's low, it's got less to flop, and also I can cut it back. Now these are plants that we lifted last autumn in order to take out the hedges and the flanking trees, and also to add a lot more roses. So essentially it's a rose garden. And also it's morphed into something completely different. And it's changed the role of the yews, these Irish yews. Now frame it and contain the space, and they feel much more statuesque. So it feels like a really big change within the existing garden. And that's exciting, that's inspiring. Now, coming up on today's programme, Francis visits a walled garden in North Yorkshire, which is beautiful, but exists to enhance the lives of those who tend it.
It's a peaceful, calm place, and whatever you feel like when you walk through the gates, and you just feel very different, feel better.
We meet a couple in Cornwall in their coastal garden who have been gardening together for over half a century.
55 years, and we've always gardened together and quarrelled together about the gardening.
Constructively. We join Nick in his brand new garden in Northamptonshire.
Now I am finally in my forever garden, and these poor plants that I've been dragging around the country for years can actually go into the ground.
And I shall be sowing seeds for my new cut flower border. We've made changes here at the Mound. We did have the borders ending back along this line here, and we used scaffolding planks as a kind of shutter to hold it. And it was always meant to be temporary. This was 2 years ago. So we took them out, extended the bed, and used this corten steel edging, backfilled the soil, and what this has done is give the mound a much better base. It feels more proportionate. I've indulged myself in buying 4 really nice topiary yew balls, and now I've got a whole strip going right round the mound to plant up. Now I intend to harmonise with what we've got here, and actually that's quite easy because this has a very clear defined colour theme, which is pale yellow and pale blue. Now I've got some plants that I've salvaged, so that's a start, but that hasn't stopped me going shopping. And I have got a few plants here, and you can see they exactly fit the colour scheme. I've got pulmonaria, I've got wallflowers, I've got primulas, which will mix in with what I've got. Now, this pulmonaria can go here. Pulmonaria likes a little bit of shade, likes fairly moist soil, but good drainage. I've got a geranium, hardy geranium called Roseanne. Roseanne is a fantastic geranium, but it does grow about 2 foot tall and about 3 foot in spread. So we'll pop this down here, and that will go on flowering most of the summer. Now, this is just blue, so to get the yellow I want, I've got these primulas. These are a cross, a hybrid, between Primula vulgaris, which is the primrose, and Primula veris, the cowslip. Now, primulas tend to like a bit of shade, but they're very adaptable. Got Brunnera with these lovely clear blue flowers and a silvery leaf. I've got a couple of Aquilegias here. This is Yellow Queen, which is very, very pale yellow. And one of the fun things about having a colour theme in any garden project, and it doesn't matter what the colours are, is taking those colours in whatever direction they want to go. You know, when is pink red? When is pink white? When is yellow ivory? It doesn't matter. It's a game, but it's a good game. And that can come in there. Now these are wallflowers. Absolute perfect colour. Wallflowers are biennials, which means you sow them one year and they flower the next year, and that's it. And of course, wallflowers are a plant that you grow for their fragrance as much as anything else. There's no other plant that has such a lovely honey fragrance. One lot there, and I've got some more which I'll put on that side. Now at this stage, stop, have a look, go and have a cup of coffee. Come back and have another look, maybe sleep on it, ask someone else, move things around. The absolute rule is place twice, plant once. Right, I'm going to place on the other side and take my time, but while I'm doing that, we're going up to North Yorkshire, in fact to the edge of the North York Moors, which is one of my favourite places in the country, and Francis has gone to visit a garden with a very special project.
This is Helmsley Walled Garden, and in late spring, just look at it, absolutely packed with vibrant colour. In any really well-designed garden, there's always something to look at, no matter when you visit. But I have to say, I think I've hit it on exactly the perfect moment. Look at the wisteria just come into flower at the same time as the alliums, and those two purples are beautiful and soft. But then, as you move around into this long border, the purples continued, and then accented by yellow, so a spodline lutea and different euphorbias. It's just beautiful. And that yellow and purple then continues in this amazing laburnum arch. How beautiful is that? Look at the flowers hanging, and again, the purple alliums, and this whole little arbour makes you want to explore and transition through from here into the rest of the garden. But as well as being a feast for the eyes, there are many other benefits that this beautiful space offers.
June Taish is the head gardener here. She's clearly a talented grower, but not just of this stunning display of flowers.
Hello, June.
Hello, hello.
Busy working away. Nice to meet you too. It's so glorious.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Well, tell me about the walled garden itself.
It's an 18th century walled garden. It's actually built on a parallelogram, which is quite an unusual shape, I think, to try and capture as much sun as possible. The garden's very much planted to demonstrate horticultural approaches that we could see anyone trying in their own garden, I have to say.
And this iris border particularly, I mean, tell me about this, it's just breathtaking.
Well, this was created probably about 4 years ago, and it was created by volunteers. We don't have any paid garden staff, so volunteers lifted and divided iris, replanted iris, potted iris up for sale. So it was a lovely learning experience for our volunteers. They really got a lot out of it. And that's the principle that we take forward. That's how we look after the garden.
How many volunteers have you got?
We've got over 83 garden volunteers. They look after the garden and the garden looks after them as well. We have a really nice mentoring scheme. We look to try and support our volunteers, whatever kind of support they need. So some of our volunteers might want to learn more about horticulture. Some might want to be more involved socially with their community. This is where they come and they can feel purposeful and feel they've achieved something in their week.
Well, clearly it's working because it's absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful.
It is lovely, thank you.
The volunteers work in all weathers and all year round. Julian Rowe worked in an office environment his whole life, so the kinds of walls he's surrounded by have changed somewhat.
Hello, Julian.
Hello.
come to give you a hand.
You're going to join me. No, that's
Yes.
good. We're just hoeing at the moment.
Yeah.
And then we'll be planting seeds. Are you quite okay with the hoe? Are you familiar with hoeing?
I'm fairly familiar with a hoe, yes.
Actually, I'm not. You know, I learnt to hoe here. Can you believe
you?
that? You know, and apparently a lot of weeds you shouldn't dig up. You should just hoe. You know, and I didn't know that. So that's one of the first things I did learn.
So what made you want to start coming here?
Well, I actually came here for the therapy. It's just been wonderful. I mean, the therapy is just coming here to do the gardening.
Yes.
You know, which sounds crazy, doesn't it? Because, but it's just being part of a team, and you know, you have to do your job properly because you know the garden is a beautiful thing. You don't want to ruin it.
So there's meaning to the work that's going on here.
Absolutely, that's the key thing. And actually, that's what I find I don't have a lot of now that I've given up working for a living. You know, it's very hard, and here I get meaning. It gives me meaning to my life.
I'm so impressed with the work the volunteers are doing. They've created some beautiful spaces within these 4 walls, and now there's stunning spring colour to enjoy.
These Siberian irises are quite underrated compared to the much more impressive bearded iris. The nice thing about them is that they're a bit more versatile. You can grow them not in full sun, and also they have beautiful bronze autumn foliage, so they give a really good year-round interest as opposed to the bearded ones which flower magnificently and then are gone. So these, I think, are some of my favourite plants. There's something about a walled garden, isn't there? They just feel like inherently magical spaces. Probably something to do with the huge walls keeping the wind down a little bit and keeping the temperature up. And this here is the kitchen garden, and it's really lovely seeing that nod to tradition. But also, I think those walls and growing veg can be very nurturing things for people who maybe need a little bit of support in the garden, and sowing a seed, letting it grow, and then literally harvesting the fruits of your labour at the end of a season when it comes to growing food is an incredible process. It's a very hopeful process. And I think it really sums up the whole ethos of what they're doing here in this garden.
The team that works so hard to make this garden what it is are refuelling with a well-earned tea break. I'm joining Emma and Anne.
So do you two work a lot together?
Yes, we do actually.
Yes,
we
we do.
thrive off each other, don't we?
Yes, yes. I've probably got a bit more experience with gardening than Emma, and I can help her. And she's been at the garden for a lot longer than I have. And there's probably things that she knows about the garden. It's a good team.
Yeah,
isn't
it works both ways.
We work as a good team support.
Yeah.
So what is it that you love about it?
You know, this lot is my second family, really, because my parents live away. They mean a lot to me. You know, sometimes, you know, you come into work and you're not in the best of moods, and they just cheer you up and ask you what's wrong. And
It's a lovely, peaceful, calm place, and whatever you feel like when you walk through the gates, and you just feel very different, feel better.
Well, having seen the volunteers now, I can see how integral they are to this place, but also how joyful they are.
Absolutely. That's the most important thing, actually, that they enjoy their involvement. And if we get some great work done as well, that's a real bonus. But the work they do when they do it is of a really good standard. And we challenge our volunteers so that they get more out of it, and they really feel they've done a great job themselves.
Because, of course, volunteers are giving up a lot of their time to be here, but in exchange, they're learning really good horticulture from you.
Yeah, it's really lovely to see people gaining confidence, using tools correctly, using horticultural terms that they never even knew before, but actually loving doing it, really enjoying it, because that's what you should be doing with gardening. Gardening is joyful.
I think what June and the team are doing here is nothing short of inspirational. You know, they're creating a beautifully preened garden without it being precious in any way. And it all goes to show, or to prove actually, that gardening doesn't just grow plants, it can also grow people.
Thank you. I do think it remarkable, the scope and ambition of that project. 83 volunteers. Just think of the lives that are changed and the ripple effect and the families and the social effect of people gaining so much from working in a garden and sharing it. And it's a lovely garden too. Now, what I've got here is a yew hedge that is coming into being. Now, these are cuttings that I took, I think, about 6 or 7 years ago, but I only planted them out when they reached a reasonable size. And you can see I've put a line along here because this is the height of the hedge I want. So the first thing is when you're growing a new hedge of any kind, don't cut it back until it's reached the height that you want it to be at. And then you can cut them off and they will start to thicken. Now, it's very straightforward. Just take it off roughly to the line. And it's worth pointing out, this only applies to young plants, and April is a very good time to plant evergreen hedges. On a more substantial or established hedge, you don't cut now because you don't want to disturb nesting birds. The great thing about yew, which is very adaptable, is it must have good drainage. It hates sitting in wet soil. And you can see I planted this on a mound and I put lots of grit underneath it. Now, what I can do is cut the sides as hard as I like. Hedges invariably thicken out. Yew doesn't like making a hedge much under 1 metre. So if you want a low hedge, it's not a suitable plant. It does look a little bit wonky and wobbly, but don't worry about that, because as it thickens out, you can get a nice straight edge onto it. I'm going to finish the rest of the hedges now, but we're going to Truro, to the garden of Nick and Billa Jeans, in a fabulous location.
You do feel very lucky to be in this beautiful part of the world. It is a gorgeous place. So when the sun's out, we do like to spend most of our time in the garden. It's a lifestyle thing, isn't it? Yeah, what else would you do at our age? You know, we do it. I'm Billa.
And I'm Nick.
We've been married for 55 years and we've always gardened together and quarrelled together about the gardening.
Constructively. We argue, but we don't fall out. Is typically Cornish in that if you've got good visibility, it's about to rain. If you've got poor visibility, it is raining. And in the winter, if you've got a hard easterly wind, and you can watch the plants shrivel up, you know.
We do catch the frost because it rolls down the hill, unfortunately. So it's not as balmy as it could be. So in the front garden, we have the river on our doorstep. So we do have a bit of a microclimate there. It faces south, so we can shelter things right next to the house. I think late spring is the best time of the year, when you've got that rush of growth. Well, bulbs do really well in this front bit, because it's very free draining. We're on a slope, it's hot and sunny in the summer. So the irises, loving it, aren't they? They need to have a bit of a good bake with the rhizomes to make them flower, and they certainly have. Fennel does very well in Cornwall. It's a lovely tactile plant. I think we choose plants for the benefit to wildlife. A lot of stuff is left to grow naturally, and I will edit out what I don't like.
This is our garden watering system, very necessary. The roof water is all piped into a drainage system which comes down here and was originally meant to go into the river, which would be a terrible waste. So what we did, we dug a hole here about 9 foot square and 9 feet deep, and we built a concrete block tank, and all the rainwater is stored here. Then the question was, how do you get the water out of the tank? And then I found they still make these. I put it in, and there you are. And you can fill a 3-gallon watering can in about 10 pumps. And then, of course, as soon as I built it, Billa uses it as a base to put plants on.
Heavy stuff Nick will do, and I'll do the fiddling. So very often he will do something, and then I'll have to come around and titivate and raise it to a higher standard, definitely.
You finesse things, I think.
Yeah. I'm scratching around like an old hen, he tells me.
Yes, I say she's scratching around like an old hen. But to the result of her scratchings, we get all sorts of interesting things.
So over in the main garden, we love to grow what we eat as much as possible. We've got perennial onions and kale and herbs. So any time of the year you can go and pick parsley. I love to be able to do that.
That Billa is working on converting me from my more traditional sort of views of gardening. She's a particular enthusiast for no dig. And our vegetable garden this year, there's virtually no digging and cultivation in it at all.
The potatoes have come up all right.
The potatoes have come up all right.
Yeah.
It remains to be seen whether having planted potatoes in a bed that hasn't been disturbed for 18 months, whether it'll be possible to bank them up.
Yes, you just put on more compost. Gardening has changed a lot even in our lifetimes, I suppose, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so we used to be more clearing everything. Sometimes you just have to leave things and observe. They do say, don't they, that the gardener's shadow is the best fertiliser. Lots of the plants, the flowers, arrive just by magic. They are self-seeders. So we've got the erigeron, we call them St. Clement daisies, Mexican fleabane, of course the lovely, lovely forget-me-nots. Cow parsley. I love it when the cow parsley grows up tall enough to meet the apple blossom.
Here you have our main composting area. It looks a bit like Steptoe's yard, but then that's because it's all built out of recycled corrugated iron which came off a shed roof about 30 years ago. We've got this wire screen on the top, which is just a bit of old wire reinforcing mesh on the wooden frame. We can take out the twigs, which we don't want too many sticks and twigs in it, and it also spreads the stuff out well. And then, so I can show you, the wind is not helping today. Pick out the twigs, and then it's grass. So you get an even sort of mix, and then just level it off, and we go back for another lot. So it builds up in layers. But by the time it's been turned 3 or 4 times over a year, we've got all the mulching material to go back on the garden again. So, I mean, this year we finish up with about 2 or 3 tons of compost, which has cost us nothing.
It's not the easiest garden to work with as we're getting older because it is on quite a considerable slope.
Yes, it can be quite challenging gardening in a coastal location. We haven't really got anything to complain about, I don't think.
It's nice gardening together.
It is, yes. Very good.
Good boy, come on. Look at these lovely, lovely, lovely things. Aren't they beautiful? Keep going. I think if you are lucky enough to have a collaborator, a partner that you can garden with, then that is a really good thing. Sarah and I have always gardened together, and I wouldn't dream of doing anything here without her collaboration and cooperation, and that sometimes, as Nick and Billa pointed out, leads to arguments, but hopefully not rows. Creative debate. Now, we agreed to move this rhubarb here from the cottage garden. This is a variety called Tophill Early. And you can see that it's growing quite well, and it may look as though it's ready to harvest. But because I moved it, I'm not going to harvest at all this year. And if you plant rhubarb or move it, leave it. Don't pick any of the stems. Let the leaves grow full foliage, and through photosynthesis, the roots develop, and then next year it'll be in a better position to give you plenty of stems. Now, Tophill Early, as the name suggests, is an early rhubarb. Now here, if Ned isn't going to lie all over it, go on, get off. Terrible dog. This is Victoria, which is a later variety. It's very big, it's very robust and very delicious, but it won't be ready for harvest until well into April. And then, as with all rhubarb, stop picking it, certainly by the end of July, and just let it have a chance to recoup its energy. And that way, you can keep rhubarb going for generations. And stewed rhubarb for breakfast in spring with a little bit of fresh yogurt and some of our own honey, fantastic. Now, still to come on today's programme. Nick makes plans for a garden in his new home in Northamptonshire.
Because the focus here is all about these stems, I don't want to compromise them with an ugly stake. So I want to let you into a little secret form of staking.
And we go to Surrey to meet an enthusiastic grower and swapper of houseplants.
So this one is a Hoya globulosa Welsh mountain zoo.
Oh my goodness. This is a wish list plant, Claire!
But first we're going to visit one of your gardens, and this belongs to Sue Millard.
Hello. This is our garden in Cumbria. We've been here almost 40 years this summer, and I thought you might like to see all the different kinds of daffodils that have emerged from the lawn in the years that we've owned this house. We're on top of a small hill here, and although we have some shelter from trees, you can see we're very open to the weather. When we first came here, there were just single leaves in a flat lawn. My husband has mown around them, and old varieties have come up that we've never seen before. These are two of the oldest daffodils we have here. Narcissus pseudonarcissus, our wild daffodil, and a direct descendant called princeps, which is taller and larger, and it flowers a little bit later. This is an extremely old daffodil, Telemonius planus. I understand it was known at least as early as 1623. This one is Mrs. Langtree, and it was probably planted when our 18th century house was rebuilt in 1902. This double I know as butter and eggs. Daffodils are always popular with the pollinating insects, the hoverflies and the beetles. That's our cat Sooty, with a big bank of Carlton daffodils. It's amazing the things that will reappear if you just give them time and don't mow them off. Now I'm looking forward to our bluebells in May and 50 yards of honeysuckle hedge in June. But for now, bye-bye.
I know what you want. You want to walk, don't you? Come on then. This way. Here, come on. thanks, Sue, for sharing that incredible range of daffodils. I have to say I'm very envious because this year the daffodils in the grass here at Longmeadow have been a profound disappointment. I put that down to the fact that they've had such a wet winter that they've grown lots of foliage at the expense of flowers. And by the way, please do continue to send in films of your gardens, whatever it is, whatever type it is and whatever particular passion you have. Now, I'm sure that sooner or later everybody faces the problem that we do all the time, is you see wonderful flowers in the garden. You want to cut them, bring them indoors, they'll look superb in a vase. But if you take them, the border will have a great big hole in it and won't look so good. And the answer is to have an area of the garden specifically and only for cut flowers. So this year, I've made 4 raised beds that are going to be just for cut flowers. So I thought today I'd get going with Gypsophila. And Gypsophila is one of those plants that are perfect for flower arranging. Easy to grow, they're a perennial, they just keep on giving. Tiny little black seeds, but I will try and do it as evenly as possible. So if you get a nice strong seedling with a good root system from day one, everything is going to go better. And it is extraordinary to think that each of these little seeds are going to result in a plant that is an explosion of flower. Now, I will just press these down lightly, and all I'm doing is just making sure there's contact with the soil, and then cover them thinly with vermiculite. If you haven't got vermiculite, it doesn't matter. You could use a little bit of sieve compost. Not too deep, but just a light covering. It's not a bad idea when you're growing Gypsophila to water them and then put them in a polythene bag, and that will keep the moisture level high. Keep them warm, keep them light, and then when the seedlings appear, take them out the bag. And they should start to appear in about 10 days' time and be ready to prick out in about 3-4 weeks' time and plant out the end of May. Right, I will label these. There we go. Now, last year, Nick rented a house and created a temporary garden using lots and lots of containers. Well, I'm pleased to say that after a long search, he's finally found a home. Last September, we joined him as he began to get to grips with his new garden.
After a year living in a rented cottage, I finally bitten the bullet and bought my own place. I'm just so thrilled to finally be able to put down roots, literally and metaphorically. I guess, like going to any new place, you need to take a little bit of time just to kind of settle yourself in, get to know the locals, get to know the spirit of the place. It's often so worthwhile to just live and breathe in a garden for a while before you start to make any decisions. It's about 30 metres deep and about 6 metres wide. And I just love the fact that it's flanked down the sides with these ancient stone walls. It just sort of sets the garden into the context of this village. All the stones have arisen from the space around us. What I'm really pleased about is it's got a great structure of trees and shrubs already here, which gives me a great sort of palette to work on. You can see the buddleia sit in the back there. I reckon it takes up maybe 1/8 of the volume of the whole garden. It is absolutely vast. So what I'm going to do is a major cutback, take it down to about 1 metre off the ground, let it reshoot in spring. It's long flowering and, of course, loved by bees and butterflies. I'm sure you've all come across the idea of no mow May. Well, I went for something slightly different here, which is the shaggy summer look, which is basically all about leaving a good proportion of this lawn to run wild, to turn back to meadow. Of course, it's great for wildlife. There's lots of flowering plants that will appear here and provide support for pollinators. I wanted to cut down my maintenance, but actually, most significantly, I wanted to see what the seed bank in the soil was. And so I was absolutely thrilled to see that I've got things like ladies' bed straw, growing away. And so they've flowered through the summer in this sort of grassy mix. I haven't had to maintain it at all. And of course, it's been brilliant for providing food for all the pollinators. It's not a huge garden, but it's about average for the UK. And so I really wanted to pack in as much as I possibly could. So the terrace on this side will have effectively a sort of a fire pit in the wall, and then a little bit of a fire on the other side as well, which will be a nice sort of breakfast area. And then really the rest of this space that's currently sitting as lawn is going to be nearly entirely planted.
I'm happy to say I have plenty of plants to get me started. Most were in pots in my rented garden, so it was a case of getting them stored safely over winter and brought over here. Time has flown since I moved. Now it's nearly spring, and although this March is proving to be a bit wet and miserable, I'm figuring out where I want them all to go.
These poor plants that I've been dragging around the country for years can actually go into the ground. And so there are certain plants like this rose back here, for example. This is called Bengal Crimson, and in theory it will flower year round. But because I've been slightly torturing it in a pot, it's not blooming at the moment. It does, however, have buds in March, which is pretty extraordinary. There's all sorts of other bits and pieces here as well that have come from the rented cottage. Got this fantastic Anastodontia over here. All of them are going to be freed and starting to grow in the garden really soon. And I've got all sorts of new plants as well that I'm going to add into the mix. So various hellebores, some wonderful Erysimum down here. This is a fantastic cultivar, quite a new one, called Poem Lavender. And it's got that lovely mix of kind of peachy pink with a mauve and a slight sort of purple note to it. And what's brilliant, of course, about these perennial wallflowers is they don't stop flowering for about 3 years and then drop dead. As long as you take cuttings, you can keep them going in the long term. It's been a long and very cold, very wet winter, but it's given me a great opportunity to get on with some of the jobs that I need to in the garden here. So I've pruned the big buddleia behind me. That will go eventually, but I've taken the bulk of the material away. And then with this hawthorn that I've inherited, it really supports wildlife. And by lifting this canopy up, it's going to let more light into the ground underneath, and it really just presents a whole load of different growing opportunities. I'm really keen to make sure that my new garden has got as much interest as possible. A great way of doing that, even in the depths of winter, is to have plants that have beautiful stems and trunks. And so I'm going for these 3 birches. They're going to do all sorts of jobs for me here. They help screen the building to the side. They're going to throw some dappled shade behind them. And I'm going to make sure I've got evergreens planted around them so these stems really pop in winter. Because the focus here is all about these stems, I don't want to compromise them with an ugly stake. So I want to let you into a little secret form of staking, and it all happens underground. So I'll just get this first layer out. And it was always that easy. Right, out that comes. As you can see, this has got a fairly decent, stable, rooty top on it, and that's going to make all the difference. The other absolutely key thing, if you're putting in a specimen of this nature, is to make sure that its best face is facing the direction you're going to most commonly see it. First step in the process is to get some batons on top of the root ball. And they're going to be what stabilises and really holds this in place once I've got the wiring on top. These don't need to be anything fancy, they can be old offcuts of pallets and the like. Next stage is these angle iron stakes. These have cost about £2.50 each. The next process is the straining wire. Now again, this is really cheap. You can buy a roll like this for 3 or 4 quid, and it's got all sorts of uses around the garden. So what I'm going to do is just to attach this into one of my angle irons just here. The idea is really to get this as tight as possible by hand, Then I can do a last knock-in of the stakes, and that's really going to pin this timber frame onto the top of the root ball. This is absolutely solid. It's not going to go anywhere. You avoid the ugliness of a stake. And you also, sort of similar to that contemporary form of staking, which was always really low down, by doing this underground staking, you allow the tree to move around on the top, which will really strengthen it in the long term. And you'll have a happy, established multi-stem tree.
With the structural trees in and the pruning done and spring just around the corner, I can't wait to see how the garden's going to turn out this summer. I'm hoping it's going to be a riot of colour.
You can tell that Nick, although he's keeping a calm exterior, knows that he's on the cusp of a big adventure. Well, I really envy him because it's such fun. And also, take his advice. When you get a new garden, however daunted you might be, just take stock. And if that takes you a year, it takes you a year. Just take your time and then make your plans. Now, here in the writing garden, it's white, it's frothy, it's light. And at the moment, you have the snowflake, the leucosium, and then the tulip that's just beginning to open up in the last day or so. It's quite early for us, that. This is yellow spring green and the white daffodil failure. And that's just about it. Very, very simple. And sometimes simplicity is all you need. I've got quite a few tomatoes that I sowed in January and pricked out into plugs that really need potting on. And these are all destined for the greenhouse. If you haven't sown any tomatoes now, don't worry, you're not too late at all. But if you sow tomatoes now, they'll be ready to plant out into your garden or on a balcony or into pots around about the end of May into June, and then you'll be harvesting them in August and September. Whereas if I put these into the greenhouse, I'll be harvesting from these, hopefully, by the end of June, certainly early July. These are a variety called Tigerella, which, as the name suggests, are striped. They're very sweet, a delicious tomato. Put it in quite deep. Deliberately, I'm going to bury some of that stem. It'll anchor it, and also it'll encourage root growth from the stem. These will go back into the greenhouse to grow on. I reckon I'll be planting these into their final place, into the soil in the greenhouse, in about 5 weeks' time, maybe 6, certainly before Chelsea. And if you've got any extra ones, as I will have here, pop those on too, grow them on, and give them to people. They make a great present, and they are easy and really rewarding to grow. And increasingly, of course, younger people don't have access to a garden, and yet the desire to grow things remains as strong as ever. And we went to visit Claire Lowry at her home in Surrey, where although she doesn't have a garden outside, she is growing an extraordinary range of plants inside.
I just cannot imagine living in a space without plants. I love the look of houseplants, so when I was in my early 20s, I started kind of getting 1 or 2. It's got a little bit obsessive, and I think I've got over 300 now. So yeah, collection's still growing. Welcome to my living room. Over here I've got one of my favourite plants. This is an Aglaonema cutlass, and it's so, honestly, it's so ridiculously easy to care for. I would say it would make a really good beginner plant because I do very little to this plant, but it's got really gorgeous foliage. It's really adaptable when it comes to light as well. It can survive in lower lighting conditions, so if you don't have that much natural light, it's perfect. I also pretty much let it dry out between waterings because it's very drought tolerant. So yeah, I love that one. And then I've got my massive bird of paradise here, which is just growing like a weed at the moment. It keeps turning to face the window, so I have to keep rotating it. So it's a little bit wonky right now, but I do love it. I just think it's got that beautiful kind of jungly vibe, and I think it's gorgeous. So I live in a fairly small space. I'm just in a one-bedroom flat, and so I've had to think a lot about how I can really optimise the space so that it doesn't feel cluttered and I'm not constantly tripping over plants. So yeah, I've got my big hanging rail that goes all the way around this section of the room, and then I've got my stick-on shower shelves over there on the window, and they're fantastic because they just allow natural light to pass through them. So yeah, it's just getting creative with the space and having lots of plants on different levels. I've got certain zones in my house that I've created. Like I've got my cabinets, for example. The main cabinet in this room here is my tropical plants that need very high levels of humidity, tend to prefer higher levels of heat. And then I've got a propagation/rehab cabinet in my bedroom. And that is the one that's always chaotic, always very messy, but it's where most of my new plants will start off when I bring them in. So in my cabinet, I've got some of my most kind of treasured, precious plants. And the great thing about creating a cabinet space is firstly that it's really easy to do, but you can just control pretty much everything in there. So I can make sure that my plants are receiving enough lights because I've got grow lights in there. I can control the humidity. I used to use heat mats in here, but nowadays it seems to just store the heat pretty well, so I don't bother. But I've got a little temperature and humidity gauge, which is a little bit lower at the moment because the doors have been open a lot today. Usually it tends to sit around about 26 degrees Celsius, which is obviously very warm. And ideally the humidity will be anywhere between about 65 and 80. But a couple of my favourite plants in here, I could take you through lots, but this is my Alocasia Jacqueline, and I'm just totally in love with this plant. I think the texture of its leaves is just incredible. They're so furry, kind of bristly furry, not super soft, but that along with the colours of the leaves, it's stunning, and it seems really happy in a cabinet environment. And also I just love the stems on it. I think they're just so pretty and kind of purpley and almost like they've been printed. And then this is another one that I got very recently at the plant swap, Alocasia sinuata. I just find it incredible that nature can create something that looks like that. Almost kind of looks like it's been 3D printed, but really cool. So yeah, that one's doing really well in there. It's only been in there for a couple of weeks, but it's already unfurled this new leaf, and it's also got a little baby coming up in there as well. So these are my Monstera dubias, and this is the plant that I'm probably the proudest of in my collection at the moment. I got it when this was about 30 centimetres high about a year ago, and as it's grown, the form of the plant just started to get bigger and bigger, and then really change and develop these beautiful fenestrations. And I added a section of moss pole onto the plank to chop and propagate it, and I chopped this section probably about 2 weeks ago now, so it doesn't have any roots in the soil at all yet. All of it is contained purely within the moss pole, and that's what's keeping it going. It's just blown my mind really how much the form of this plant can change. Not only has the structure of the plant changed, the whole colour's changed. I'm very excited about the potential of this bit. I think the key to the massive growth that I've achieved in this plant has been the light that it's received. I've always made sure that it's kind of pretty much right up against a window. I know a lot of people grow this plant in the UK, and I think because it's another one that's known for being able to survive in lower light conditions, sometimes people just assume that that's the best for it. And in my experience, it's not at all. So lots of light, and hopefully it will do this. The plant community is just the most incredible thing. I met some lovely friends, I made some really close friends as well, and we started doing swaps. It's been a wonderful way to build up the plants that I've got at the moment, but it's also just been the most fantastic way to connect and meet like-minded crazy, weird, amazing plant people. Super excited because today my friend Emma's coming over and we're going to do a mystery plant swap.
Thanks for having me round.
Not at all, I'm so excited.
Should I go first?
Yes.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you don't have this one.
Oh my goodness, is that the cream splash?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's beautiful.
It's a philodendron cream splash.
Oh my God, that variegation is just stunning.
Yeah, with a little bit of extra splashy variegation.
Yeah. Oh, that's so pretty.
Yay.
Thank you. Oh, exciting. Okay, close your eyes because mine are slightly on display.
Oh my goodness. These are the variegated Hoyabella?
Yeah, it's the one with the funky name, the Louis Bois.
Hopefully I can get this one to flower really quick.
Crossed.
Okay, so this next one.
Oh my God, it's a fern leaf.
I didn't put any like moss or anything around it because I figured you'd want to pot it straight into some soil.
That's so exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
And the last one for you has literally just been potted. So this one is a Hoya globulosa Welsh mountain zoo.
Oh my goodness. This is a wish list plant, Claire! Oh my goodness, it is stunning and I love like the silvery blue of it.
It's so cool, isn't it? And like the texture, it's very different from a lot of other anthuriums.
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm really, really proud of what I've created. I love my space. It is my own jungle haven. I feel so relaxed and so at home here, and whenever I'm away for a certain period of time, I always kind of long to get back to my plants and be in my safe, creative space with them. So yeah, it's amazing, and I encourage more people to bring more plants into their home as well.
I've said it before, but it really wasn't so long ago when houseplants were considered to be a bit old-fashioned and stuffy, and now look at them. They're just looking fantastic. And I now grow Streptocarpus amongst other houseplants. But 20 years ago, I associated them entirely with my granny. Well, I then went to South Africa and I saw them growing in the wild, and it transformed everything. I realised they're beautiful plants and they're really interesting. Now, they're not difficult to grow if you give them what they want, but what they want is fairly specific. They like damp shade, but with very good drainage. Now, that's quite tricky to provide, and maybe that's why my granny grew them in her dark little sitting room. And what I have found here at Longmeadow is they are happiest underneath the staging on the gravel in this greenhouse. But they do need potting on, dividing, feeding, watering, looking after, particularly at this time of year. So if I take it out of its pot, you can see the roots, quite fibrous roots, completely packed round. That's solid. So what I'll do is break that up, like that. That's one, and I think I can make at least 3 out of this. So I'm going to repot them into a mix of leaf mould and perlite. And the perlite is going to ensure good drainage, and the leaf mould is a nice loose growing medium, but low in fertility. A bark-based compost will do fine, but add plenty of grit or perlite. And then I'll put a crock in the bottom of the new pot. Some of that underneath, and then just fill around it. Now, having repotted, I'll clean it up. Any dead material, spent flower stems, leaves that are looking a bit sad, don't be frightened to cut them off. I will give this a good soak, let it drain completely, pop it in the shade, and then water it once a week. But if you've got a mister, you can spray it daily if need be, certainly more than once a week, and particularly in hot weather. Keep the air moist and the roots fairly dry, and they'll be happy. Right, I've got a lot more to do, but while I'm doing this, here are your jobs for the weekend. If you have a greenhouse, it's too early to plant out tomatoes or chilies or melons or any other tender crop. But use the space by planting young salad plants. If you've grown them yourself, that's fine, or you can buy them in plugs from a garden centre. Then these will grow quickly in the protection of the greenhouse, can be harvested and enjoyed, and then cleared when the tomatoes are ready to go in the ground. When you see signs of new growth, now is the best time to divide herbaceous perennials like hostas. Dig up the parent plant and divide it. With a hosta, the best way to do this is chopping it with a spade. Some plants are more fibrous rooted and can be pulled apart. Replant a section in the original hole, and then with the new divisions, create new planting wherever you want them. I'm bringing out the pots of tulips, which I keep under cover. It's always tricky knowing how to store tulips because you want to keep them out of the rain, and thank goodness I have done, because they would have been saturated this year and then the bulbs can rot. But at the same time, they don't need protection from the cold, and it does them quite a lot of good to have cold. So I've been storing most of them in the bus shelter, and tulips won't be killed by a touch of frost. That won't do them any harm at all, and they're beginning to flower. Here in the Paradise Garden, the key tulip is a cuminata, and it's really long and thin, and they're quite an intense vermilion and orange. And what I've planted round the outside is a tulip called Flyaway, which is much cruder than a cuminata, but it's got the same colouring and it's fairly long. In the corner, I've got Negrita, which is quite a pale purple. It's touched with mauve, so quite rich colours here in the Paradise Garden. And hopefully the crabapple blossom will come soon at the same time as the tulips, and this long, wet winter will be a thing of the past. But that's it for today. Enjoy the rest of the Easter weekend. Get out into the garden if you possibly can. And next week I'm away, so Adam will be with you in his garden, and I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in 2 weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.
Watch the passing of the seasons through the natural beauty of an ancient city. Press red for the Chronicles of Armagh on BBC iPlayer. And major